Top Tip Tuesday time again. It's Bob here from INSYDIUM. Hello. So today we're going to be looking at an xParticles feature, and this is how you get some really fast to simulate and view particle advection. So this is particles being moved around by the velocity data, which is generated from a smoke and fire sim. So this is an amazingly powerful technique. As I say, quick to simulate, really fast to render, but the results are detailed and very impressive. So let's start that clock and we'll get going. Here we are in our start scene then, and as you can see we have a sphere which is being animated by this vibrate tag, and then we have an XP emitter which is emitting from the sphere. In that emitter, if we go to the emission tab, you can see that we have 0 speed. We're emitting 1,000 particles, but the birth rate we've changed to per frame, so 1,000 per frame, and we have a lifespan of 50 frames with a variation of 20, which is giving us this. And we're going to move these particles around using a smoke and fire sim. We're going to advect them. So for now, let's just deactivate the emitter and let's get that smoke and fire sim sorted. So we're going to go to Dynamics, and in the Dynamics folder of our system, we'll bring in an xPExplosiaFX. And here is our pink domain in which we're going to do our sim. Now we're going to emit our fire from the same sphere. So let's activate the sphere, let's highlight it. We'll go to Tags, Extensions, INSYDIUM Tags, and we're going to go to the xPExplosiaFX source tag. And just in the default settings, hit play, we're going to straight away get the smoke and fire sim. Now when we're working with xPExplosiaFX, I prefer in the display tab options to use the grid mode, which is a really fast way of displaying our sim, and we can increase that level of detail a bit should we require. But now we're getting a really quick display mode, but you get a good idea of what the sim is. Now what we're going to use is the velocity information which is calculated during this solve to move the particles around, and we can actually view that if we change the display from fuel and smoke to velocity. There we go, there's the information contained within our voxels which is going to enable us to move around our particles. So now we know this simulation is here and it's happening. If we switch off the display, it'll calculate much more quickly. So let's just go back to fuel and smoke, and then in the mode, let's just switch that display off. So the simulation is happening, but we're just not seeing it. So now let's reactivate our particles, and we want that velocity information to move them around. So how do we do it? Well, we go to the xPExplosiaFX, to the Advection tab, and advect particles. Let's click that on. If we hit play now, yes, we're getting our particles to move around. Excellent. Now we just want to damp down this simulation a bit because some of them are flying out to the top. Now the way we're going to do that is if we go to the xPExplosiaFX settings, to the simulation, we're going to dissipate the heat that's being created. So let's move down until we get to the dissipation settings. There we go, look, dissipation, and we're going to get the heat, and we're going to add a bit of heat dissipation, and it just means that they're no longer going to be able to fly out at the top because the heat is kind of disappearing before they get a chance to. Excellent. And we could just perhaps add a bit more detail if we go to the top of our simulation tab, and look, we could add a little bit more turbulent strength, and that's going to give us a bit more kind of turbulent movement. That's looking really good. So now we're going to go about rendering these particles with the standard renderer, and you're going to be amazed how quickly it renders and really how good the look is. So to do that, we need to go to the Material Manager, and we're going to go to Create, Extensions, and we're going to bring in an xParticles material, and we're going to put this on our emitter. Let's just make the sphere invisible. And now if we hit Control R to render, we've rendered the frame and those particles. Let's just move forward a bit so we get some in our scene, somewhere like that. Hit Control R, and there we're rendering them. And admittedly, doesn't look very good yet. But let's go into our xParticles material, which is really powerful. First of all, we need these to be rendered really small. So we're going to go to the size settings and reduce this scale way down to maybe 0.5%, really small. Hit render. Yes, so now we're getting there. You can kind of start seeing the look, can't you? Let's just go to our emitter, to the emission tab, and now that we've set this up, let's increase this up to maybe 10,000 particles per frame. So an awful lot of particles pumping into the scene. It's still simulating pretty quickly, and you're going to see that if we stop it there, for example, and hit render, look how fast it renders. It's still super fast. So now we want to change the color. We'll go to the color settings, and we can go to the modifiers and we can color it according to any of these bits of data. Let's click the speed, move down, and we want the slow ones to be, yeah, we can use blue for the slow ones, that'll look good, but we're just going to reduce the values so they're a bit darker, and that'll become clear why in a moment. And then the fast moving particles on this knot, we're going to render those a really deep orange, but again, I'm just going to bring the color value down a bit. So now if we hit render, we've got this kind of color gradient, but it's still not looking quite right. Where these particles are overlapping, we want them to start kind of glowing, so we need an additive rendering mode. And we can do that if we go to our render options up here, to the edit render settings. You can see, look, we're in the standard renderer, but if we come down to xParticles options, we can change it from the default blend of normal to add. And now if I hit render, yes, look, we're getting that additive render mode. Excellent. So what we're going to do is we'll go to the emitter. We're going to bump up this birth rate even higher to 20,000 particles per frame, and we're going to render this to picture viewer and come back to see how it looks. So here's our render. That took just 2 minutes and 50 seconds to render all 155 frames. The longest any one frame took was, look, 1 second, and we've got over 1 million particles in each of these frames. So a really cool additive particle look.